The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been this quiet. 200 species sat in their designated seats, their translators humming softly as they waited for the High Arbiter to speak. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive dome floating in the void between three star systems, built by civilizations that had mastered the secrets of the universe long before most species learned to make fire. High Arbiter Velthan of the Corvani Dominion rose slowly from his seat. He was an impressive figure, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with pale blue skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His people had served as arbiters of galactic peace for over 6,000 years. In all that time, he had never delivered news this grim. Fellow members of the council, he began, his deep voice echoing through the chamber, I must inform you of a development that will bring sorrow to us all. The assembled delegates shifted nervously. When the High Arbiter spoke of sorrow, it usually meant death on a massive scale. Our long-range observation posts have detected movement from the Threkker swarm. Velthan paused as gasps and murmurs filled the chamber. They have chosen their next target, a small blue planet in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. The local inhabitants call it Earth. Ambassador Yilix of the Fenari Collective rose from her seat. She was a beautiful creature, by most standards, covered in iridescent feathers that shifted colors with her emotions. Right now, they were a deep shade of gray, indicating profound sadness. How many sentient beings live on this world? She asked. Approximately 8 billion, Velthan replied. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 8 billion lives that would soon be extinguished. Chancellor Morix of the Delphani Republic, a stocky being with rough gray skin and small black eyes, activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. A blue and green planet appeared, rotating slowly in the projected light. It was a beautiful world covered in vast oceans and green landmasses, swirling white clouds drifting across its surface. This is Earth, Morix said, home to a species called humans. They achieved basic spaceflight approximately 70% of their years ago. They have landed members of their species on their single moon and sent primitive probes to nearby planets. What of their defenses? Asked a delegate from the Varaxian Combine, an insectoid species known for their military expertise. Morix made a sound that his translator rendered as a sigh. They have none, at least. None that would matter against the swarm. Their most advanced weapons are chemical propellant projectiles and fission-based explosives. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light capability. Their satellites are primitive by our standards. Their communication systems rely on radio waves that crawl through space at the speed of light. Then they are already dead, the Varaxian delegate said bluntly. We should begin preparing memorial records for another lost species. No one disagreed. The Threkker swarm had been consuming civilizations for 12,000 years. They were not a species in the traditional sense, but rather a collective organism, a hive mind that spread across space like a plague. Each swarm vessel was a living thing, grown from organic materials and controlled by the central intelligence known as the Prime Heave. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next world. In 12,000 years, no species had ever successfully resisted them. Not the Corvani with their advanced technology. Not the Varaxians with their warrior culture. Not even the ancient progenitors, the first spacefaring species in the galaxy, had been able to stop the swarm. They had simply learned to stay out of its way. Large is the fleet moving toward Earth? Ambassador Yilix asked, though she already suspected the answer would be terrible. 4,000 vessels, Velthan replied. The largest swarm fleet assembled in 3 centuries. The chamber erupted in distressed sounds from dozens of species. 4,000 vessels was not just a conquest fleet. It was an extinction force. The swarm clearly intended to strip Earth of all biological material, leaving nothing but a barren rock orbiting its yellow star. Why? Asked a small delegate from the Minari Enclave, a peaceful species of telepaths. Why would the swarm send such a massive force against such a primitive world? Velthan Esferai's blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought among his people. We do not know. Perhaps Earth is rich in organic materials they desire. Perhaps the humans have done something to attract their attention, or perhaps the swarm simply wishes to feed. Can we warn them? Ambassador Yilix asked. Can we at least tell them what is coming? What would be the point? Chancellor Morex replied. They cannot run. They have no ships capable of carrying their population to safety. They cannot fight. Their weapons are toys compared to the swarm. Warning them would only cause panic and suffering before the end. Then we do nothing? We observe. We record. We remember. Velthin's voice was heavy with regret. It is all we can do. The Council's charter forbids interference in the affairs of pre-space flight civilizations. Even if it did not, we lack the military power to challenge the swarm directly. Any intervention would simply add our own casualties to theirs. The chamber fell silent again. On the holographic display, Earth continued to rotate peacefully, ignorant of the doom approaching it. The humans were probably going about their daily lives at this very moment, working, playing, loving, fighting their petty wars over resources and beliefs. They had no idea that a force beyond their comprehension was coming to end everything they had ever built. I propose a moment of silence, Velthin said, for the humans of Earth, who will soon join the countless other species consumed by the swarm. 200 species bowed their heads or made whatever gesture of respect their cultures demanded. For 30 seconds, the great chamber was completely still. Then, slowly, the council returned to other business. There were trade disputes to settle, border conflicts to mediate, the routine matters of galactic governance that continued regardless of which species lived or died. Earth was already forgotten by most of the delegates before the session ended, but far across the galaxy. On that small blue planet, something was happening that the Council could never have predicted. Deep in their military installations, human scientists were picking up strange readings at the edge of their solar system. 4,000 objects had appeared seemingly from nowhere and were accelerating toward the inner planets at speeds that should have been impossible. The humans did not know what was coming. They did not understand the threat they faced. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something was approaching their home, and they were not going to wait quietly for it to arrive. In bunkers and command centers around the world, phones began to ring. Generals were woken from their sleep. Presidents and prime ministers were pulled from meetings and dinners and family gatherings. Within hours, every major government on Earth would know the truth. They were not alone in the universe, and whatever was coming did not appear to be friendly. The Galactic Council believed the humans were helpless. They believed Earth was already lost. They believed this would be another quiet extinction, another species added to the memorial records. Another sad footnote in the long history of the galaxy. They were wrong. They were so very wrong, because humanity had spent its entire existence fighting for survival. From the first prehistoric humans, who faced down predators with nothing but rocks and sticks, to the soldiers who had stormed beaches and climbed mountains and bled for every inch of ground, humans had never stopped fighting. It was in their blood. It was in their bones. It was the very core of what made them human. The swarm was coming to consume them. But the humans were about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Some prey bites back. Lisa Monroe had been working at NORAD for 7 years. She had seen strange readings before. Space debris, solar flares, satellite malfunctions. But she had never seen anything like this. She stared at her screen, her coffee growing cold in her hand. 4,000 objects had appeared at the edge of the solar system approximately 6 hours ago. They were moving toward Earth at nearly 1% the speed of light, which should have been impossible for any known technology. At their current rate, they would reach the planet in roughly 28 days. "Get me General Peters," she said to her colleague. "Right now." Within an hour, the reading had been confirmed by every major space agency on Earth: NASA, the European Space Agency, the Chinese National Space Administration, the Russian Federal Space Agency. They all saw the same thing: 4,000 objects, arranged in a precise formation, heading straight for Earth within 12 hours. Every world leader had been briefed within 24 hours. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency session behind closed doors, Within 48 hours, humanity had done something it had never done before in its entire history. It had united. The Secretary General of the United Nations stood before the assembled delegates, his face pale, but his voice steady. We do not know what these objects are. We do not know where they came from. We do not know their intentions. But we must prepare for the possibility that they are hostile. We have approximately 26 days to get ready. I am proposing the immediate formation of an Earth Defense Initiative with full cooperation from every nation on this planet. There were no objections. For the first time since the organization's founding, the vote was unanimous. Colonel Jake Morrison received the call at 3 in the morning. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many wars. He had served in the Middle East, in Africa, in South America. He had commanded soldiers in some of the worst conditions imaginable. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. "You want me to do what?" he asked the voice on the other end of the line. "Come on, the Earth Defense Initiative," the voice repeated. "You have 48 hours to assemble your team and report to NORAD. This is not a request, Colonel. This is an order from the President himself." Morrison hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he got dressed, kissed his sleeping wife goodbye, and drove to the nearest military base. His first recruit was Dr. Patricia Walsh, a physicist from MIT who had spent her career working on theoretical propulsion systems. She was a small woman with wild red hair and the kind of energy that made everyone around her feel tired. When Morrison explained the situation, she did not panic. She did not cry. She simply nodded and asked when she could start. "Yesterday," Morrison replied. "Good answer," she said. "Let's get to work." The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity unlike anything the world had ever seen. Every military on Earth began repositioning its forces. Nuclear submarines that had been hiding in the depths of the oceans moved to strategic locations. Missile silos that had been dormant since the Cold War were reactivated. Aircraft carriers formed battle groups in every major ocean, but it was not just the military that mobilized. Factories that had been making cars and refrigerators and televisions shut down their production lines and started making weapons and ammunition. Universities turned their research facilities toward military applications. Computer programmers worked around the clock to create new targeting systems and communication networks. Amateur radio operators established backup communication channels in case the main systems were destroyed. Ordinary people did their part too. Farmers stockpiled food in underground bunkers. Construction workers built shelters in every major city. Teachers organized evacuation drills for their students. Parents taught their children how to hide, how to run, just how to survive. The Galactic Council watched all of this through their long-range sensors. They were confused. Why are they preparing to fight? Ambassador Yilix asked during a council session. Surely they must understand they cannot win. Their technology is thousands of years behind the swarm. Their weapons cannot penetrate swarm armor. Their ships cannot match swarm speed. What do they hope to accomplish? High Arbiter Velthan studied the sensor data carefully. Perhaps they do not understand the true nature of the threat. Perhaps they believe these are merely invaders from another nation on their own planet. "No, Chancellor," Morix said slowly, pulling up intercepted human communications. "They know. Listen to this." He played a recording of a human news broadcast. A serious-faced woman was speaking to the camera. "Scientists have confirmed that the approaching objects are not natural phenomena and are not of human origin. World leaders are urging calm while preparing for what many are calling the greatest threat in human history." "They know," Morix repeated, "and they are preparing to fight anyway." "Madness," the Varaxian delegate muttered. "Absolute madness." But deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a bunker that had been built to survive nuclear war, Dr. Walsh was making progress. "I've been studying the energy signatures from those ships," she told Morrison during a late-night briefing. "They're communicating using some kind of quantum-entangled signal system. Every ship is connected to every other ship instantaneously, regardless of distance." "Which means what exactly?" Morrison asked. He was a soldier, not a scientist. He needed information he could use, which means they're operating as a single mind, Walsh explained. One intelligence controlling 4,000 ships. It's actually brilliant. No communication lag. Perfect coordination. Every ship knows exactly what every other ship is doing at all times. So how do we beat it? Walsh smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. We disrupt the signal. Cut them off from each other. Make them fight as individuals instead of as a collective. Can you do that? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. I need every physicist on the planet working on this problem. I need resources. I need time. You have 17 days, Morrison said. Make them count. Walsh nodded and returned to her work. Around her, dozens of scientists from a dozen different countries worked side by side, their old rivalries forgotten. Russian physicists collaborated with American engineers. Chinese programmers shared data with European mathematicians. For the first time in history, humanity's greatest minds were working toward a single goal. Above them, the stars shone coldly in the night sky. Somewhere out there, 4,000 alien vessels were racing toward Earth, carrying death and destruction beyond anything humanity had ever faced. But humanity was not sitting idle. Humanity was getting ready. In Washington, in Moscow, in Beijing, generals planned their strategies. In laboratories and universities, scientists searched for weaknesses to exploit. In homes and shelters across the world, ordinary people prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect their families. The swarm had destroyed 17 civilizations. They had never faced anything like this. They had never faced a species that refused to accept the inevitable. They had never faced humans, and in 17 days, they would learn what that meant. The Threcker swarm arrived on the 28th day, exactly as predicted. 4,000 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, blotting out the stars like a dark cloud spreading across the sky. Each vessel was a living thing. They were not built from metal and plastic like human ships. They were grown from organic materials, shaped by the hive mind over thousands of years, into perfect instruments of destruction. Some were small, no larger than fighter jets. Others were massive, stretching for kilometers. Their surfaces covered in strange growths that served as weapons and sensors in landing bays. At the center of the fleet, connected to every vessel through quantum-entangled neural links, was Prime HFY. It was not a creature in the traditional sense. It was a consciousness, a vast intelligence spread across thousands of organic processors distributed throughout the fleet. It had consumed 17 civilizations. It had absorbed the knowledge and memories of billions of beings. It was ancient and powerful, and absolutely certain of its own superiority. It looked down at the small blue planet beneath it and felt something close to hunger. Begin the harvest. It commanded. The first wave of swarm vessels descended upon the major cities of Earth: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, Sydney. They came down like falling stars, their organic hulls glowing with heat from atmospheric entry. They expected to find panic. They expected to find chaos. They expected to find prey running in terror, easy to capture and consume. They found something else entirely in New York City. Chief Petty Officer Danny Garcia watched the swarm vessels descend from his position in a fortified bunker near Central Park. He was a Navy SEAL, a member of the most elite Special Forces unit in the United States military. He had fought in jungles and deserts and frozen mountains. He had faced enemies that most people could not imagine in their worst nightmares. But he had never faced anything like this. A contact in 30 seconds, his radio crackled. All units prepare to engage. Garcia checked his weapon one more time. It was a standard assault rifle, modified with armor-piercing rounds. Against the alien technology descending from the sky, it might as well have been a toy. But it was what he had, and he would use it until he had nothing left. The first swarm landing craft touched down in Central Park, crushing trees and scattering debris in every direction. A hatch opened, and creatures began pouring out. They were nightmarish things, vaguely insectoid, with too many legs and mouths filled with sharp teeth. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move. Open fire, Garcia commanded. The night exploded with the sound of gunfire. Thousands of soldiers, positioned throughout the city, opened up on the invaders with everything they had: rifles, machine guns, grenades, rocket launchers. The air filled with smoke and fire and the screaming of dying things, and the swarm creatures died, not easily, not quickly, but they died. The armor-piercing rounds punched through their hard shells. The grenades tore them apart. The rockets turned them into smoking ruins. Garcia watched one of the creatures fall just meters from his position, green fluid leaking from a dozen wounds. He felt something like hope surge through his chest. "They bleed," he shouted into his radio. "These things bleed. If they bleed, we can kill them." The message spread across military networks around the world. In London, soldiers fighting in the streets heard it and fought harder. In Tokyo, defenders who had been on the verge of retreat rallied and pushed back. In Moscow, Tank Commander Sergeant Yuri Volkov received the message and smiled grimly. "You hear that?" he said to his crew. "They can die. Let's help them do it." His tank rolled through the rubble-filled streets, its cannon firing at every swarm creature it encountered. The aliens were tough, but they were not invincible. Concentrated fire from multiple angles could bring them down. Volkov shared this information with every unit he could reach. And suddenly the ground battle began to shift. High above the Earth, the battle in space was equally fierce. The International Space Station had been converted into a crude weapons platform over the past 4 weeks. Astronaut Commander Beth Sullivan floated in the observation module, watching the swarm fleet through reinforced glass. "Missile launch confirmed," her radio reported. "Impact in 47 seconds. From submarines hidden in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, a wave of nuclear-tipped missiles rose toward the sky." They were not sophisticated weapons by galactic standards. They were crude, primitive, powered by chemical propellants, and guided by simple computers. But each one carried enough destructive power to level a city. Sullivan watched them climb through the atmosphere, leaving trails of white smoke behind them. She watched them reach the edge of space and continue upward, toward the swarm fleet. She watched them strike. The explosions were silent in the vacuum of space, but they were no less devastating for it. Brilliant flashes of light erupted across the swarm formation as nuclear warheads detonated against organic hulls. Dozens of vessels were damaged. Several were destroyed outright, their remains tumbling through space in burning fragments. "Direct hits on 47 vessels," Sullivan reported. "Confirmed kills on 12. The others are damaged but still functional." "Keep firing," came the response from the surface. "Everything we have." More missiles rose from the oceans. More explosions lit up the sky. The swarm fleet, which had expected no resistance at all, found itself under constant attack in the Galactic Council chamber. The delegates watched in stunned silence. "This is impossible," Chancellor Morix whispered. "No primitive species has ever inflicted casualties on the Threkker. Not in 12,000 years. Not one." Ambassador Yelix's feathers had turned pure white, a sign of profound shock among her species. "They're actually fighting. They're actually hurting the swarm." High Arbiter Velthan said nothing. He simply stared at the sensor data, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans were dying by the thousands. Their cities were burning. Their military forces were being overwhelmed. By any reasonable calculation, they were losing, but they were not giving up. They were not running. They were not begging for mercy. They were fighting with a ferocity that the galaxy had never witnessed before. Prime Hive 7 was equally confused. In 17 conquests spanning 12,000 years, it had never encountered resistance like this. These creatures were physically weak, technologically inferior, and vastly outnumbered. By every logical metric, they should have surrendered within the first hour. Instead, they were attacking with what could only be described as suicidal determination. They threw themselves at swarm forces without regard for their own survival. They used weapons that damaged their own cities just to inflict casualties on the invaders. They fought in the streets and in the buildings and in the sewers beneath their cities. They fought like they had nothing to lose. They fought like they would rather die than submit. For the first time in its ancient existence, Prime Hive 7 felt something unfamiliar stirring in its vast. Consciousness, it felt uncertain, and on the burning streets of 100 cities, humanity continued to fight. Day 12 of the invasion. The world was burning. New York had fallen. London was in ruins. Tokyo was a wasteland of collapsed buildings and burning streets. Beijing held on by a thread, its defenders fighting block by block, building by building, room by room. Moscow had become a fortress, its people refusing to surrender even as swarm. Forces closed in from every direction. Humanity had inflicted terrible casualties on the invaders. Over 300 swarm vessels had been destroyed or disabled. Countless ground forces had been eliminated. But it was not enough. The swarm still had nearly 3,000 ships in orbit. They still had millions of ground troops. They were still winning. Colonel Morrison stood in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, staring at the strategic display. Red icons covered most of the map, indicating areas under swarm control. The blue icons representing human forces grew smaller every hour. "We're losing," he said quietly to Dr. Walsh, who stood beside him. "Slowly, but we're losing. At this rate, we have maybe 3 weeks before total collapse." She had not slept in 4 days. Her eyes were red, her hair was a tangled mess, and her hands trembled slightly from too much coffee and too little rest. But there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. "Then it's a good thing I finished it," she said. Morrison turned to look at her. "Finished what?" Walsh held up a small device, no larger than a football. It was covered in wires and blinking lights and looked like something a college student might build in a garage. "The quantum disruptor," she said. "It's ugly. It's barely tested. And there's a small chance it might blow up in our faces. But if it works, it will cut the swarm off from their hive mind for approximately 6 hours. Morrison stared at the device for a long moment. 6 hours? That's all I can guarantee. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. The swarm's quantum-entangled communication network is incredibly sophisticated. This thing will overload it temporarily, create so much noise that they won't be able to coordinate. Each ship, each ground unit, will be on its own. They'll still be dangerous, but they won't be able to work together. And after 6 hours, they'll adapt. They'll filter out the noise and reconnect. But for those 6 hours, they'll be vulnerable." Walsh met his eyes. "It's the best chance we're going to get." Morrison made his decision in less than a second. "What do you need?" "A rocket. Something that can get this thing into high orbit, right in the middle of their fleet. And I need every weapon on Earth ready to fire the moment the disruptor activates. You'll have it." The next 48 hours were the most intense of the entire war. A modified rocket was prepared at a launch site in Florida. The site had already been attacked twice by swarm forces, and the surrounding area was a cratered wasteland. But the launch pad itself remained intact, protected by a ring of defenders who had sworn to hold their ground no matter the cost. Chief Petty. Officer Garcia was among those defenders. His unit had been reduced from 30 soldiers to just 8. They were exhausted, wounded, and nearly out of ammunition. But they held the line. "Just need to buy them a few more hours," Garcia told his remaining soldiers. "That rocket goes up, and everything changes. Everything." The swarm seemed to sense that something important was happening. They launched 3 separate assault waves against the launch site. The first wave was repelled with heavy casualties on both sides. The second wave nearly broke through before reinforcements arrived from a nearby naval base. The third wave was the largest yet. A massive push involving thousands of swarm. Creatures supported by air attacks from low-flying organic vessels, Garcia fought until his rifle ran out of ammunition. Then he picked up a fallen soldier's weapon and kept fighting. When that ran out, he used his pistol. When the pistol was empty, he used his knife. Around him, his soldiers did the same, fighting with whatever they had, refusing to give ground, and then the rocket launched. It rose from the pad on a column of fire and smoke, climbing into the sky faster than the swarm vessels could react. Garcia watched it go, a small smile on his bloodied face. "Good luck," he whispered. "In orbit." Commander Sullivan tracked the rocket's progress from the damaged remains of the International Space Station. Half the station had been destroyed in an earlier attack, and she was one of only 3 surviving crew members. But the communication systems still worked, and that was all that mattered. Rocket is approaching optimal position, she reported. Disruptor activation in 30 seconds. On the surface, every military commander on Earth received the same message. Every submarine, every missile silo, every aircraft carrier, every soldier with access to heavy weapons. Prepare to fire everything, the message said. On my mark, the disruptor activated. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the swarm fleet, ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly veered off course. Ground forces that had been advancing in precise formations stumbled and scattered. The vast intelligence of Prime Hive 7, which had been controlling thousands of units simultaneously, suddenly found itself cut off from its own body. For the first time in 12,000 years, the swarm was alone. Fire, Morrison commanded, every nuclear weapon in humanity's arsenal launched simultaneously. From submarines in every ocean, from silos hidden in mountains and deserts and frozen wastelands, from aircraft carrying bombs that had been designed to end civilizations, hundreds of missiles rose toward the sky, each one carrying enough destructive power to destroy a city. They struck the swarm, fleet like the fist of an angry god. Explosions erupted across the formation. Ships that had been drifting aimlessly were torn apart by nuclear fire. Vessels that tried to evade found themselves colliding with their neighbors, unable to coordinate their movements. In 6 hours, humanity threw everything it had at the invaders. Holding nothing back, risking everything on one desperate gamble, when the disruptor's effect finally wore off, and Prime Eve 7 reconnected with its fleet, it found devastation beyond anything it had ever experienced. Of 4,000 vessels, fewer than 800 remained functional. Ground forces had been decimated, cut off from coordination and destroyed piecemeal by human defenders, who suddenly found themselves facing confused and disorganized enemies. The neural network that had coordinated swarm attacks for 12,000 years had been severely damaged, whole sections burned out by the quantum overload. Impossible, Prime Hive 7 calculated. Statistically impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. The humans had done the impossible. They had crippled the swarm. On a battlefield somewhere in Russia, Sergeant Volkov stood atop his damaged tank and broadcast a message on a frequency he knew the swarm had been monitoring. "You came to our world thinking we would be easy prey," he said, his voice carrying across the airwaves. "You thought we would run? You thought we would hide? You thought we would beg for mercy?" He paused, looking up at the sky where swarm vessels still burned. "We don't beg. We don't hide. We don't run. We fight. And we will keep fighting until every last one of you is dead or gone." In the Galactic Council chamber, 200 species sat in stunned silence, watching sensor data that none of them could believe. The humans had done it. They had broken the swarm, and the galaxy would never be the same. Day 30 of the invasion. The swarm retreated, for the first time in 12,000 years of conquest. The Threcker swarm turned away from a world it had targeted for consumption. The remaining vessels, fewer than 800 out of the original 4,000, limped toward the edge of the solar system, their organic hulls scarred and damaged, their coordination networks still struggling to recover from the quantum disruption. Prime Hive 7 made the calculation coldly and logically. Victory was still theoretically possible. The swarm could continue the assault, could grind down the human resistance through sheer attrition. But the cost would be catastrophic. The remaining fleet would be destroyed. It would take centuries, perhaps millennia, to rebuild. The Hive would survive, but it would be weakened beyond anything in its long history. The humans had made conquest too expensive, and so, for the first time ever, the swarm chose to withdraw. On Earth, people emerged from their bunkers and shelters and hiding places. They climbed out of rubble and ruins. They looked up at the sky and watched the last swarm vessels disappear into the darkness between stars. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. No one quite believed what had happened. Then, slowly, the cheering began. It started small, just a few voices here and there, but it spread like wildfire from city to city, from country to country, until the entire planet seemed to ring with the sound of human triumph. People who had been strangers embraced each other. Soldiers who had fought for weeks without rest collapsed in exhaustion, smiles on their faces. Families who had been separated during the chaos of the invasion reunited, tears streaming down their cheeks. Humanity had one colonel. Morrison stood in the ruins of what had once been Washington, D.C., looking up at the sky. The city was devastated. The White House was gone. The Capitol building was a pile of rubble. The monuments that had stood for centuries had been reduced to broken stone and twisted metal. But the flag still flew. Somehow, impossibly, the American flag still flew over the ruins. Tattered and burned but unbroken, Dr. Walsh stood beside him, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "What happens now?" she asked. Morrison was silent for a long moment. "We rebuild," he said finally. "We learn from this. We study the technology they left behind, and we make sure nothing like this ever happens again." "You think they'll come back?" Maybe not. But there are other things out there. Other species, other threats. We know that now." Morrison turned to look at her. "We need to be ready." Walsh nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that. The quantum disruption technology, the swarm's organic ship designs, the communication networks they use. We captured samples. We have data. With enough time and resources, we could reverse engineer some of it. We could build our own ships. Ships that could travel between stars. How long? Years, decades maybe. But we could do it," she smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. "We beat them with rockets and nuclear bombs. Imagine what we could do with real technology." Far across the galaxy, the Galactic Council was having a very different conversation. The chamber was in chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Translators struggled to keep up with the flood of voices. Fear and confusion filled the air like a poisonous fog. High Arbiter Velthan finally managed to restore order by activating the emergency silence protocol, which temporarily disabled all translation devices. In the sudden quiet, he spoke. "Fellow delegates, please. We must discuss this calmly and rationally." "Calmly?" Chancellor Morrick shouted. "The Threcker swarm has been defeated. The most dangerous force in the known galaxy has been broken by a species that discovered fire a mere 100,000 years ago. How can we be calm about this?" Ambassador Yilix's feathers were cycling through colors so rapidly that she appeared to shimmer. "The High Arbiter is right. Panic will not help us. We need to understand what this means and decide how to respond." "What is there to understand?" the Varaxian delegate demanded. "The humans are dangerous. More dangerous than anything we have ever encountered. They must be contained before they become a threat to the rest of the galaxy." "Contained how?" Velthan asked quietly. "We watched them fight the swarm. We saw what they did with primitive technology. How do you propose we contain a species like that?" The Varaxian had no answer. "We could make contact," Yilix suggested. "Offer them membership in the council. Bring them into the galactic community peacefully, and give them access to faster-than-light travel." Morix objected. "Energy shields, plasma weapons, advanced manufacturing." He pulled up the sensor data from the invasion. "Look at what they did with chemical rockets and nuclear explosives. Their first response to an alien threat was to unite their entire species and build weapons. Their instinct, when faced with danger, is not to flee or negotiate. It is to fight. Imagine what they will do when they have real technology." The chamber fell silent. Everyone was imagining it, and everyone was afraid. "They will come to us eventually," Yilix said softly. "They have seen the stars now. They know they are not alone. A species like this does not stay confined to one planet. They will build ships. They will explore. They will expand. It is not a question of if, but when." "Then we must hope they come in peace," Velthan replied. "And if they do not?" No one had an answer. On Earth, the rebuilding had already begun. Cities were being cleared of rubble. Factories were being repaired. Governments were reorganizing. The world had been devastated, but humanity had survived worse. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that had killed millions. They would survive this too. But something had changed. Something fundamental and irreversible. Humanity had looked up at the stars and seen enemies. They had fought those enemies and won. And now they knew, with absolute certainty, that the universe was not a safe place. It was not a friendly place. It was a dark and dangerous wilderness filled with things that wanted to consume them. And humanity had decided, collectively and without discussion, that they would never be victims again. In a small town in Kansas, far from the ruined cities and the battlefields, a young woman named Amy Carter sat on her porch with her grandfather. The old man had fought in the war. He had lost friends and seen horrors that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he had survived, Grandpa, Amy said, looking up at the night sky. Are there more of them out there? More aliens? Her grandfather nodded slowly. Probably, sweetheart. The universe is a big place. Will they come here too? Like the swarm did. The old man was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm but hard, like steel wrapped in velvet. Let them come, he said. Let them all come. We'll be ready. Above them, the stars glittered coldly in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council watched and waited and feared. Somewhere out there, the remnants of the swarm licked their wounds and remembered their defeat. Somewhere out there, 1,000 species were learning a new word, a word that would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. Human and the universe would never be the same again.